This is a Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 36, Best of 2008. Welcome to 2009.
Welcome to 2009. That was one of the best of 2008 you just heard there, Enslaved Clouds, here on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Jason.
And I'm Mark.
And we are doing, of course, the top 14 records of 2008 as we enter into 2009 here. Kind of cool, year two of the podcast. Not totally, but the second year we've done it, I guess. Yeah. So we wanted to sort of commemorate the year in metal in our first year with a year end. So hopefully you enjoyed the last week's Christmas podcast as much as we did. But this one will be kind of unique as well because it's obviously not going to be focused on one band. Enslaved Clouds, the reason we decided to start off with that is that was a pretty high up record for both of us. Yeah. For sure.
I have to say I actually prefer Ground to Clouds. But
do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's just... you can't get everything in the show.
Yeah, so. That's true. Well, and I went with Clouds. Basically, what Mark and I decided to do is we sort of mailed each other our top 10 records and then kind of saw what matched where. And then if we had double crossover, then one of us picked that. Yeah. And we sort of filled in the blanks. I took Enslaved. So it's my fault. I played.
No, that's okay.
Just kidding.
No, I like the whole record, but this was definitely one of those kind of grower records for me, especially. I was just kind of underwhelmed the first couple times I listened to it because... one thing I really like hearing Enslaved is like the really beautiful mix with it really like visceral and brutal. Horrible.
Yeah. And they've definitely, this is
kind of even.
They've sort of gone away from that in the last couple records a little bit more. Vertebrae is the record we're referring to in case you are unaware. And Vertebrae actually came out after we did our two-parter Enslaved podcast. So we thought, definitely need to get this in because it's probably going to be many, many years before we ever did another Enslaved show. Yeah. We'd have to put out quite a few records or do something extraordinarally weird.
Well, I think we've given everybody enough Enslaved to know they like them or don't.
Yeah, so. Exactly. But yeah, this was sort of a strange record. It had, it was very minimalistic, proggy. That whole like weird spacey solo you pointed out reminded you of kind of like Opeth-y almost too.
Yeah, like the arrangement and it's a little, I don't know. I like it a lot, but I don't know how far they can really go with it.
Yeah,
they seem like they're on that same level as Catatonia, where they got to either make some kind of shift or just end it
or go somewhere else. Yeah, I would have to agree with you. So, but anyways, we don't want to spend too much time, on each band here. But if you have some of your favorites or you disagree with us, please send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com or let us know on iTunes by leaving a message. So. But what we're going to do is we're going to do sets of two with one of each of ours, I guess. And we're going to kind of go in reverse order and then end the show with our your number one and my number one. So, which are not too far off, really. It's not like Mark's number one is like my number 14 or something bizarre like that.
Yeah, and mine aren't necessarily. It's hard to rank stuff like that as well. So it's.
You're more of an album guy, anyways. It's hard for you to rank this stuff. But tell us about one of the next bands that's on your list.
Oh, here's one that didn't really make much noise anywhere,
except from us when we did the podcast for these guys.
And I guess that was right before that record came out. The Dismember.
Self-titled
again. Yeah. Okay, it's been a while since I've looked back at it, but this is one where. Fred Espy's gone. Basically, we've got David Bloomquist and Maddie Karki are the only two members left.
I think so, yeah.
But they seem to be a little bit more recharged. They've got some younger guys in the band now, and they finally got rid of that the Iron Maiden guitar thing all the time. I think Bloomquist kind of got okay, that's enough of that.
I mean, it's still twin leads are still there, but it's used very sparingly.
But they've almost tried to go back to that original Skogsberg sound, which I think they've almost came to it this time. And the songwriting is a little bit more diverse. I mean, it's definitely got some more Autopsy influence back into it instead of the last couple of records they've been decent, but I think The Guy That Never Was I think that was the last one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the one previous. That was hit or miss for me.
It was okay.
It had a couple good tunes, but...
The one right before that, what was that?
That was Where the Iron Crosses...
Where Iron Crosses Grow was actually
awesome.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I dug that a lot. So.
And then you could kind of tell, though, that Fred was not his head wasn't in it anymore. The drumming was just, kind of consistent, dismember, fallback kind of stuff. So,
and this tune Legion, I think, is a really good representation of just the in-your-face kind of comeback element that exists on this Dismember record.
I don't think we played the song on...
No, we didn't.
Okay, because we played Combat Fatigue, which we were going to...
We played Combat Fatigue and Under a Blood Red Sky, and I think one more. To End It All? I can't remember.
Or Europa Burns or something.
Might have been. Yeah, it might have been Europa
But this
Burns.
one's just more, it reminds me of like almost a Dismember Sweet or Carnage hybrid, where it's kind of a mess, but it all kind of comes together at the end. It's just super, super aggressive and visceral, but kind of back to their roots.
And I think it came out like March, and I really feel like it got overlooked. A lot of people on the Decibel message board were talking about this along with that Layer of the Minotaur record I mentioned in the two-parter, as those are like two of the ones that, why in the heck did Decibel not award Dismember for, doing a return to form, and they did the same thing with Paradise Lost 2 years ago. That didn't even show up in the top 40. That really bummed me out. Yeah. Because that was like really a strong, that and the Nagelfar record, but I'm not going to go there. That was 2007, so I don't want to get too mad.
And Decibel's got, I mean, it's I don't know exactly how everything's picked, but it's just not my opinion. That's fine. I don't want all my coverage to completely match with.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I have my foot, firmly planted more in the historic than the new and contemporary, because bands almost have to prove themselves to me to some degree before I'll totally jump on.
Mm-hmm. Mark's an old curmudgeon.
Yeah, so. I mean, yeah. You look at my list, and outside of a couple,
it's pretty much a lot of classic death metal type sound. So
I'm bands that have aging myself. Basically, all the bands I really like are about my age.
Yeah, there you go. Or of members of bands.
The members in the bands are my age. Yeah,
exactly. So enjoy Dismember Legion, and then we'll round things off with one of my picks, which we'll talk about when we come back. So enjoy.
You just heard Dismember Legion and Monomarth.
Embrace of the Endless Ocean, which
Yes.
rounds near the bottom of my top list. So whatever that means.
Oh, and for me, Monomarth's one of those bands that they've just always been there. And this is the first one the last one, Ode on My Side, I believe it is.
It's
okay.
Yeah, it's
decent, but it's not. This, I think everything's kind of coming together for them. They're finally figuring out who they are.
Well, and, Twilight of the Thunder God is the record that we're talking about. And myself, I never really, even though I kind of should be into Viking metal because of how enslaved I am,
Yeah.
I never globbed onto them much. You were always, I guess, maybe a bigger Unleashed fan than I was until recently, so maybe that was part of it. But
I always thought of them as like
a poor
Unleashed
man's
light.
Yeah, exactly. And so I never really got into any of their sound, and they seem really like trendy. A lot of my students always talked about them. So
it's kind of weird because they're not commercial by any stretch of the imagination.
But Children of Bodom is the same way, and I don't know how they sold themselves. Amon Amarth somehow hit the youth market with maybe their.
They're pretty over the top.
They're kind of over the top, cheesy Viking imagery.
Have you ever seen their videos?
Yeah, they're pretty.
And they're I don't even know what the we've been getting complaints because we don't have all the references we probably should have on this stuff. But the lead vocalist for Monomarth's a pretty imposing dude. He was on the cover of Decibel not too long ago with a battle axe. He's like a 6 foot something tall guy that's built.
Absolutely, and that's part of maybe the youth appeal too. I think that and Metal Blade Records, which is putting it out. I think they're one of the staple bands for Metal Blade for sure. And because it's an American label, it might get pushed here more. But
and Metal Blade's kind of come back out of the toilet recently, like 5-6 years ago. What did they have?
There was like hardly anything that I can remember. That was on there. So. Good record, and one that snuck up on me. It's funny because Mark talked to me probably 2 months ago, and we were talking about this record, and I said I had it, but I hadn't really listened to it yet, and you were saying that Grindcore Kuhn was really digging on the record, and so I said, well, it made the cover. It's people are talking about it. It seems like there's a little bit of hype around this record. I should at least give it a listen,
Yeah.
And I definitely did, and this tune in particular really caught me. Originally, I was going to go with an earlier tune, which was more anthemic. I can't even remember what it was called. It was the Tattered. I don't have the CD in front of me, so I apologize. But it was like track 5 or 6 or whatever. But the whole record really flows well.
And actually, the first thing I heard was I think the title track,
Twilight Thunder God. Yeah.
But if you I listened to it, it was the video I was watching online, but I was just listening to it.
Doesn't it have sound effects in it?
Yeah.
Stuff? Yeah.
But I think it made the song better with all these like swords clanging together and stuff. Then when you go hear the record, you're like, oh, it's kind of disappointing. It's kind of lacking.
There.
Yeah. And as over the top and cheesy as that is, it totally fit in with the, the
if
feel of
you're going to be singing about Vikings and warriors, you might as well
clanging a little bit.
Exactly, you want a little bit of that. But this in particular, I hear a lot of. They're a Swedish band. I hear a lot of like Dissection meets Gothenburg kind of elements at times, and especially kind of that Catatonia Brave Murder Day / Rapture kind of sound that really kind of rolling epic minor key kind of sound.
Well, they've always been a band that's been really kind of. They haven't really had too many frills. It's all really kind of stripped down, straightforward. But they're kind of building up their arsenal of tricks, I think, and just showing off on that track. And some of their leads aren't just aren't crazy like over the top leads like even Unleashed is doing now.
Yeah,
I think it kind of really fits the music, and it's more of a unit than necessarily like showing off a player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you, and definitely him mentioning Unleashed is another touchstone band for Amon Amarth. So. But then the next one we're going to get into is one from you, and both of us really dug this record. And for us, it seemed like almost a comeback record for this band.
Yeah,
I liked their last few. They're always a consistent band, but I just didn't really get into their.
The last one was the Mr. Beast.
Yeah, Mr. Beast, and then they did the tribute to one of my favorite soccer players, the Zidane documentary thing.
That's good, but it's a documentary soundtrack.
It's very light, But
Mr. Beast, I think, has like 2 or 3 tracks that really kind of hit it out of the park, but the rest of it's just kind of
And this one just seemed to like really hit it.
The full album, the Hawk is Howling. Yeah,
so.
Mogwai, the Hawk is Howling, and also the Batcat EP.
Which is where we're going to play Batcat from.
Yeah, is actually, the both of them together I think are definitely worth checking out, but...
To me, they're one of the better of the more consistently good, along with Mono and even to some extent, I guess, Pelican and Isis, like of that whole Neurisis kind of, drone metal kind of thing.
It's funny because Mogwai's kind of started out, they started out, less metallic, let's say.
And they've almost gotten heavier.
Yeah.
Like that My Father, My Son EP really kind of like...
My Father, My King?
My Father, My King, yeah. I don't know what I'm thinking of. An Amorphous lyric.
I tried to rip that and it's all scratched.
Oh, really? You can borrow mine, because mine works all right.
No, but that's, I think, definitely, even for people that don't really venture too far outside of the metal spectrum.
They're heavy
for the most
enough.
part. Yeah, for the most part, there's no vocals either, and it's all just like kind of noisy, kind of soundtracky.
Yeah, but there's
type
definitely
stuff.
some like movements there, kind of like orchestral kind of movements.
And I
stuff.
definitely, if you get the Hawk is Howling EP or the actual full length album,
yep.
it's got the video for Batcat, which is a pretty sweet video. I don't know if you checked it out or not.
No,
but
not yet,
It's like
but-
mixed between like Tool and like a Sigur Rós video or something.
Cool. And this is, of course, on Matador Records, which good consistent label, known for its indie rock and stuff. So enjoy some Mogwai Batcat, and then we'll come back and talk about my pick that will follow it. So. right, you just heard, starting things off, Mogwai with Batcat, and then what you just heard there was Hail of Bullets with Inferno at the Carpathian Mountains from their great record of Frost and War. And that was a kind of a shocker of a record. I don't think anyone kind of saw that one coming at all.
No, and there was always, for years there's talk of, Martin Van Drunen, vocalist on Hail of Bullets, vocalist of Asphyx, Pestilence, a bunch of other pretty seminal bands, was going to be in Bolt Thrower.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Before Carl came back.
Wasn't he almost on, was it a Victory?
For Victory.
Yeah,
he was going to be on. But this almost seems like his answer to Bolt Thrower. And
for sure.
The one thing he's always managed to get in his all of his acts is just this crushing brutality and noise. A lot of noise and everything, but it works so well.
The whole concept of this record is about the Eastern Front during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of songs about, Stalin. Obviously, Carpathian Mountains is in the Eastern European Front, which, of course, was just, as a history teacher, I always tell the kids that, World War II was won and lost in the Eastern Front. It was the Russians and the Germans. We were sort of a side thing. And granted, our war with Japan was our war, really, but the European war was won by the Russians. They lost 25 million people in World War II, and the Germans lost 12. It was a bloodbath. So that's kind of what, with the Bolt Thrower thing, all these songs really engaged in war and about war. I hear a lot of Celtic Frost kind of riffing in there too.
Because you look back at Asphyx, now it's Pestilence not so much, but ones where Van Drunen's really kind of like helmed the ship. His stuff's really straightforward, really simple, but
very simplistic.
He gets the absolute essence of what brutality kind of means, and that nobody else that I've ever heard has been able to pull off that vocal style.
And this was essentially a kind of a super group of sorts with some of the top guys from classic Dutch death metal bands.
Yeah, we got Eddie from Gorefest on drums and did a fair amount of the songwriting as well.
There's members from Howitzer and Thanatos, which I know Chris has told me that Thanatos is really the unsung band of the whole Dutch scene.
Which I don't think I've ever heard.
And he claims that if there was ever going to be like a real Hall of Fame record about that Dutch scene, it should be that Thanatos, because they started, I guess, the whole Dutch death metal sound that Gorefest and Asphyx kind of stole. So, but Chris is the historian there, so
I'm a pretty big, as far as all those guys go, Asphyx is usually my favorite.
Yeah, and I've just recently kind of gotten into Asphyx for sure. But there's, that Celtic Frost. I wrote down in Unleashed as I was listening to it, but of course Unleashed whole sound is Celtic Frost, so you got to go back to the beginnings there. But this is one of the faster tunes on the record. That's why I kind of picked it, because some of the songs are so like plodding and just like,
and it's weird how
tank just ugh.
Yeah, because at first the drumming, how it's kind of on a backbeat, kind of bugged me for the longest time. It seemed like it should have been just a little bit faster, but it almost perpetuates that machine like movement across the front. And everything. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely, and you can get the feel of just like the cold, wintry, like just.
And I think, didn't Chris do an interview with Van Drunen where he's talking about when he practices singing, because he lives in a small apartment, that he actually puts on like a World War II gas mask with a microphone inside it to sing on?
And it's interesting, Chris just recently told me, I'm sure he told you, that he's actually flying over to Holland, to Amsterdam, to interview Pestilence, because they're putting together a new record with Martin. Yeah.
Oh, really? With Martin?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's, I think, don't quote me, I'm almost positive he said with Martin, but maybe not.
That'd be cool, because, take your Mameli's vocals are all right, but I've always liked Van Drunen's better.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for that next year.
Sweet.
But and we'd also notice, just as a side note, that the breakdown leads were definitely out of the Metallica school of thought, classic thrash metal stuff.
And if we had the CD in front of me, I'd like to give a shout out to the producer of that, just with how thick wall of sound that is. Just great production.
Yeah, and I can't remember who produced it. I don't have the CD in front of me.
I didn't bring
I apologize. So good stuff. And then tell us about what we're going to hear next.
Little back to my fascination with Crust. All things Crust. Dysphere, a band that's been around quite a while and a lot of different incarnations.
Yeah.
Just kind of came into my my sight, at least. Well, basically when Top of From At the Gates joined.
Live the Storm is the record we're talking about.
Even the one that came out...
it's like 03 or 04. It was a few years back. The one that, at least this one I can remember. It's called.
Yeah, the first one, the first one, Relapse, the first one with Thomas from At the Gates.
It was definitely, I think, 02, because I remember getting it. I was at a Porcupine Tree Opeth show down in Detroit, and Matt Jacobson of Relapse was there, and he opened his trunk and handed me that and a couple other things, because he's like, "Hey, come on out, I got a bunch of stuff for you." So the president.
And now on this on Live the Storm, they've actually got Uffe Sutherland from Entomb fame.
Yep.
And you can definitely it's a little bit more. It's not as crust. It's got more, I think, more rock infusement than.
Well, I think
the
rock
last
and
one.
also some more traditional hardcore stuff. Kurt Ballou from Converge produced this, and I think it shows
Well, it's got some
this
great
sort of
in this in
American
the
production.
song that we're going to hear, "The Cage." Mm-hmm. There's some great like sing song back and forth,
Oh, absolutely.
call and response chorus stuff that's great, and just it seems a lot more minimal, but in a good way. Like the first time I listened to it, I was like, man, that's really not thick and beefy enough. But it feels like more timeless this way, I think.
And there's definitely a old school like Detroit punk rock Stooges MC5 kind of feel, or even like Radio Birdman with the helicopters kind of leads.
And like
at the
before
end.
some of the leads come in, you actually hear like the guy kicking on his patch and a little bit of fuzz before he actually kicks in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Sounds great.
It's raw, and I mean, Ballou is clearly becoming one of the better producers in all of America. I think he's just able to capture, especially the complexity of like the Converge sound, which we've talked about before, and
being able to record chaos really well.
yeah, really well. So, all right, so you're going to hear Dysphere, The Cage, and then probably a little bit of a lighter tune that I picked. Each of us kind of picked
and this, we'll talk about it when we get back to the break, but the band that's going to be coming up next is one that nobody has ever heard of, yet
or
they
talks
should be
about.
huge.
They should be. And this, to me, was the Rick Rubin production of the year, not
Yes.
the Metallica.
Yes.
This is Rick Rubin produced, so be on the lookout for that. Enjoy Cage.
Prostitution, the target we have sake. There's power in the hands of a dangerous man. There's power in the hands of an enemy of yours and an enemy of mine, that manipulates kindness for his own personal highs, as he's counting lines, counting numbers, counting lines, counting lines, counting numbers. So don't look at me and sneer, 'cause I'm nothing like you. The difference is clear. I'm your nigger you built with fear. I hope I live to see the day when your ideals go crashing away, to show you that your reflection is as cold and as black as the organs that pump blood to your veins. 'Cause you see, I never wanted to own you, or them, or really anything, just me.
Welcome back. You just heard Hours, Black, and starting things off, as Mark described earlier, was one of Mark's picks, Dysphere, The Cage. This Hours record, as we mentioned, was produced by Rick Rubin. It's one of the we were talking about listening to it on a full sound stereo. It's an awesome production.
Yeah.
And it's dumbfounding to Mark and I why these guys cannot get radio airplay. I mean,
we saw them, like 5-6 years ago? They played at like a
youth. It was like 8 or 9.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw them at U of M, right?
No, East Lansing, MSU.
East Lansing, MSU at like a dining commons. Mm-hmm. And wow, it's like, yeah, Jeff Buckley and Bono had a kid.
Yeah.
But his range is almost even more. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And the music's dark enough that to me it should be very appealing to a lot of you metal listeners out there who like good songwriting. I mean, the song's called Black. I mean, I don't know how much, American Records put it out, which of course, famous for Johnny Cash and Slayer and all that stuff. And I mean,
but it's got a feel that, I don't know, it's almost like an audiophile, like music, like just total music enthusiast thing going on with it. Like, how Jeff Buckley, when that came out, there's a little bit of fanfare, but nobody knew who he was until a couple years after his death.
It's almost maybe too good to be on the radio. I almost think maybe that's what it is, because like we were saying, what's
keeping it from like the indie crowd?
Or, I think maybe the indie crowd thinks they sound too much like U2 or Coldplay, and I think the Coldplay U2 crowd is like, it's too dark for us, and I think it just falls betwing the cracks.
I guess. So. I mean, they're from New Jersey, too. Come on, man.
There you go.
Get the Springsteen crowd and Bon Jovi.
Well, and maybe we'll put it for those people, maybe if Albert's listening to Decibel, you need to give a New Jersey East Coast push to these guys, because I know Decibel supports the Philly, New Jersey bands, so... But Mercy's the name of the record, and it's just wonderful.
And they've got 2 previous records out. Precious was the first one, right?
Precious is awesome. Yeah.
And then the second one that had the Velvet Underground cover.
Yeah, and I remember the Lullabies, something Distorted Lullabies.
Distorted Lullabies is the first one.
Oh, that's what it was. Precious is the second one. Yep. Yeah. Distorted Lullabies is the one that I got into a little bit more, I think. Mm-hmm. The second one was good, but it was nothing like this one.
No,
the
awesome. Production on it, I first threw this on and just like sat in a chair and listened to it. I was like,
wow. And the emotion just in that song that you heard, I mean, you can feel it there. So, anyways, Hours.
So you're going to say screw the Metallica as Rubin's production of the year and give it to Hours?
Yeah. And speaking of Metallica, there's, a couple... We didn't get, obviously with Top 14, there were some other bands that we really would have liked to have included in our year end. And I just wanted to give props to Metallica for putting something relevant out. But we had Septic Flesh's album on there, Arsis. Portishead's new one, Testament, put out just a fantastic record. I really like that Gojira. The Samoth Race was good. You haven't listened to it yet, but it's good kind of epic plotting doom stuff. And then the 5 and the Cynic record were all good records. So, but they didn't make our top 14. So
all the other ones that I liked came out a year before.
Yeah,
or
there
10
you go.
Years before.
There were some that came out right at the end of 2007 that just that Great Deceiver and that Dillinger.
Yeah, and the new Napalm doesn't technically come out till February.
We've heard it. It's good.
Sweet.
It's awesome. So that'll be on the 2009 best of, I'm sure. So. But the next thing we're going to be getting into is again another going back to some of your classic death metal type sound.
Yeah, Evocation, the band that was touted as one of the big boys back in the days, like in 92, 93.
And then they kind of disappeared. They
Put out
never
a
really
couple
got
demos,
a lot of
broke
street
up.
cred.
Yeah, and then they put out that Tales from the Tomb, I think it was called, like a couple years ago.
That was
Holy
awesome.
crap.
Yeah.
This
thing's even better. Dead Calm Chaos,
it's
which is
fantastic.
the newer one.
Yeah, and it's like a mix of. It's got a lot of Unanimated. I don't know how familiar all the listeners are with Unanimated, but that was one of those bands that put out 2 records.
They're both
absolutely
awesome.
Fantastic. Nobody ever talks about them.
And speaking of other bands that it sounds like that put out 2 good records that nobody talks about, it sounds a lot like Eucharist as well.
Yeah.
So,
on this track, it's got Anders Bueller from At the Gates fame, Haunted.
And playing the solo.
The lead that's almost at the gates.
I mean, it's from Slaughter of the Soul. If you don't recognize this thing at the end of this track, you're silly. So it has a lot of Eucharist, Unanimated, and At the Gates kind of stuff going on.
I mean, it feels like it was recorded in 1996.
Mm-hmm. So it's a classic tune. So we'll say no more. Enjoy Evocation with Angel of Torment. Welcome back. That was Torch with Sandstorm and one of Mark's picks, Evocation and Angel of Torment. What a great song. Just that lead is just addictive in my head. And speaking of Kurt Ballou, Torch.
Kurt Ballou show.
Yeah, Neanderthal. God, that's a tongue twister.
Or is it Neanderthal?
Neanderthal? Could be.
Depends on how you swing, I guess.
If you're Eastern or West Coast, maybe. Yeah. But Hydra Head Records put this out. This was a really strange record in a lot of ways, and this was one that you said it was kind of tough for you to get into, because at first when you heard it, and I think a lot of people, it was so like layered and dripping in like kind of pop rock elements,
it's got a lot of Foo Fighters in it, yeah.
But then if you really dig into this thing a little bit more, obviously you hear the sort of the spacey, like Cave in Jupiter kind of aspects going on. Mm-hmm. You said you noticed Cathedral, Ethereal Mirror, Violet Vortex kind of riffs going in there. I mean, the drumming's really plotting,
just a flurry of notes, and but just drenched in noise.
The drumming really is plotting like Isis kind of in a way. I don't know. It's a really great record, and this one was a grower for me. And really, the last month or two, I've really started spinning this a lot. And I was telling Mark, the best way to get into it is just to listen to it over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I work out of a home studio all day, so
it's just it's
I've
good.
only listened to the thing once.
It's good, like cleaning your house kind of music. And I think I went back and really kind of paid more attention to it after it was the album of the year for Decibel. I was kind of like, well, I liked it when I heard it, but maybe I was missing something. And then I kind of listened to it on headphones in my car a lot, and it's just good driving music, just kind of upbeat, energetic, but yet heavy, yet catchy.
Yeah,
kind of thing you can listen to in the car with like people who aren't into metal, and no one's gonna bitch or moan. So it's kind of weird. But anyways, you heard Sandstorm, and the whole record's really, I think, like 30 minutes long, and it's a really
it's kind of a lost art anymore. It's 78 minutes, and I think you don't need 14 tracks on a record.
Yeah, and Torch I think this is their second full length. It was founded by guys from Cavity, which is a pretty cool band, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Floor, I don't know much about Floor, but
I've got a couple Cavity records.
Yeah, neat stuff. So now, what are we going to hear next, Mr. Rudolph?
Bloodbath.
Who are they?
Let's drink from the cup of heresy.
Yeah, who are they? I've never heard of Bloodbath.
Well, if you're a fan of Opeth, you know that Michael Ackerfeld lends his lungs to the vocals, and that's it on Bloodbath. He's just the vocalist.
Just the vocal, and doesn't write any songs, any music, any lyrics.
Oh, we've got the two writers in Catatonia.
Catatonia is part of this band?
Catatonia. Oh my gosh. Previously Edge of Sanity.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But now it's pretty much just the Catatonia Opeth show.
Because it's...
we've got Martin Axelrod on drums now.
From Opeth.
I think, is Per in the band now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't think of his last name, but it's like a love note to American death metal almost. But
yet I hear, like in this song, I heard a lot of Edge of Sanity. I even hear some Dismember stuff going on. And there's even this weird, like, sweeping dissection riff that comes in a couple spots. It's kind of bizarre, but I picked up.
I don't necessarily... I mean, you hear a lot of Morbid Angel, especially in Michael's vocals. Like, you can almost... I finally listened to this, like, the actual CD on my stereo, like, with, nice loud volume, and you can even hear like the little inconsistencies that he's trying to mimic from David Benson kind of thing, which is pretty sweet.
That's really awesome. So if you haven't had the pleasure of hearing Bloodbath, this is a nice treat, especially if you're just a newer Opeth or newer Catatonia fan. This will kind of knock your socks off.
Yeah, and this is like their fourth album now.
Well, they had the EP and a couple full lengths. Oh no, two. This is their second or third full length. They've had two EPs.
Yeah, because the second full-length record
was the
Peter Tägtgren sang on.
Yep, that's right. Nightmares of the Flesh, I think it was
Nightmares
called.
Made Flesh.
Made Flesh, yep. So,
and if you haven't heard Funeral Furnace, go do yourself a favor.
Or Ways to the Grave. To the Grave is one of my favorites as well. And they have a nice, great live CD out, live DVD, the Wacken Carnage and all that. But anyways, this is some Bloodbath, Drink the Cup of Heresy. Enjoy.
From what did we mention? What the record's called?
Oh no, I forgot what the record was called. Do you remember what it's called? I don't have it in front of me. That's the bummer of it all.
Well, we'll find out in 2 seconds.
It's called The Fathomless
Mastery. Nice.
And this was put out by Peaceville, one of our favorite labels. So enjoy some Bloodbath. Drink from the Cup of Heresy.
far away. I see roots beneath my feet, led me through wastelands of deceit. Rest your head now, don't you cry. Don't ever ask the reason why. Inside our idle race, ghosts of an idol's false embrace. Rest your head now, don't you cry. Don't ever ask the reason why.
That was Bloodbath, Drink from the Cup of Heresy. And of course, some of you may have noticed an Opeth song
imagine that.
Ending things there. And that's, we're nearing the end of the show, and Opeth definitely crept into to my top three. I think this was my number 3 disc of the year. Number 2 or 3, really my top 3 is sort of interchangeable. So
yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, but I kind of had my Opeth fill earlier in the year, and it's not as...
it doesn't sneak up on you as much these days.
Nah, I mean, a problem that I try not to have with my CDs is listen to them to death. I got so much crap at home, I might as well cycle through it so I can like rediscover stuff again.
The magic of rediscovering.
Because I've had relationships with people before where they like to listen to the same CD over and over and over and over until I hate it.
Hate it, yeah.
Yeah, and I try not to do that to myself.
And kind of speaking hypocritically along those lines, the reason I picked Porcelain Heart from Watershed is this was probably the song I listened to more than any song in 2008. So
okay.
This was my overplayed Opeth song, but I haven't really gone back to it lately and listened to it. So it was kind of nice to take a few months off, go back and go, I still like this song.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up Martin Axelrod.
Axelson? The drummer?
The drummer.
Oh,
yeah.
Axelrod, yeah.
Axelrod. Mm-hmm. There's just some of the drumming stuff he's doing there. It's pretty. I mean, it sounds fairly straightforward, but where the drums almost sound like they're like he's going to lose the beat, and then he kind of catches back up to himself. And man, there's just some really like once I think you hit this level, you've got to just start working with finesse and not like reinventing the wheel a lot. Because the opening riff is kind of like a standard Opeth riff, but then they totally take the song differently than they ever have before.
And there's no death vocals, but yet it's a heavy song, which is a new avenue for them. They usually, if they're going to do a ballad and no death vocals, it usually stays ballad. But this tune gets heavier at the end, and I mean, it really kind of plods ahead. And for being number 9 on the Opeth list, I mean, this is the 9th full length album. It's hard to believe. That makes me feel kind of old in a way, because I was a junior in high school when Orchid came out. So
I was just watching an interview where it was for the DVD for the Roundhouse tapes, and he just tries not to think about the critical thing because they've always kind of been, the gleam in the critic's eye. They've never been panned yet for a record. He's like, well, we're just try to keep doing what we do and do it well.
And this to me was a growth record. This sort of seems like the kind of record that Catatonia has to make next, or some of the other bands we kind of mentioned before. Enslaved we mentioned as well. Enslaved just made their kind of Ghost Reveries almost. Great record, but it needs to go somewhere else. Level. And this really just has an organic feel, very much. I mean, Opeth has always talked about as being proggy, but there's songs like Lotus Eater that's just straight off the boat prog. It's got some bizarre instruments going on.
But I think the lineup now, everybody
is more creative.
Yeah, because I mean, Peter, being a great Lindgren, guitar player, left last record.
Yeah. Yeah, and so they brought in...
He was never much of a creative force, with the band later on.
Well, and Frederick Akeson, who came from Arch Enemy, I think. Right?
Well, he's come from a bunch of stuff. He was in Arch Enemy, then got kicked out because, the brother came back and he can't,
Christopher, Good old Christopher. Armageddon just didn't work out for,
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think you're right. He plays a lot of leads on this record, and it's not all falling on Michael's shoulders to play all the leads.
Yeah, he's so I don't know if it was. It might even been interviews on. Was there DVD for this?
Well, there was that
Studio Jam thing where they're talking about that.
Yeah, and then the Bridge of Sighs.
He's like, what would you want to add to this? Not like here's the solo you should play. And every time he came up with something, it was fantastic.
Yeah. So obviously, I'm sure a lot of you out there listening have already bought this record. You already know about this, but it just needed to be kind of said. But recently, they put out the Burden EP, which is a really hip cover of Alice in Chains' Wood. Until the very end, we didn't care for the very end part of it, but I think I can get past that just because
the organ seemed kind of stupid.
And it's weird because we do like what Per Wiberg does on the keyboards.
He actually fills out everything, and he's he's an incredible backing vocalist too.
Absolutely. So now one of your this was kind of your number 2, not necessarily your official number 2 record.
Well, and I was late to jump on the bandwagon here as well. I just listened to Coward finally this year, which I thought was fantastic. The previous album by Made Out of Babies to The Ruiner. That's my number, whatever it is.
Number 2
of the year.
Holy cow, we're getting near the end here. And this is Julie Christmas really kind of is what people talk about when we talk about Made Out of Babies.
Yeah,
she also does some work with Battle of Mice, another really cool band. But this is like, imagine if I
explained it to a friend of mine. Sleater Kinney meets Neurosis kind of vibe. He's like, hey, I like both those bands. This sounds awesome.
Sure, yeah, with like a Bjork kind of thing going on as well, and there's definitely this sort of like punk attitude. They come from Brooklyn, and there's sort of that street smart kind of punk SST kind of thing that I notice. Maybe not in the song we're going to hear, which is Invisible Ink, but on a lot of the other records.
This is probably the most listenable song in the record.
Oh, absolutely, because sometimes she really gets like crazy piercing.
Yeah,
it almost reminds me of some of the stuff that Kim Gordon did on Confusion is Sex from Sonic Youth,
and early PG
I Want to Be Your Dog
like
kind of cover that they did, where it's just like screeching, but it's almost like if ISIS and Black Flag got together with Later Gathering and Tori Amos. That's the only thing I can kind of think of.
But it's not to sound sexist, but usually female vocalists, they don't necessarily have that huge range. Like you had Karen from Earth Crisis who could scream, and then you've got Annika from The Gathering that can sing really well. Yep. But then you get a lady that's got this kind of range where you can it's like an old man, a gal that can scream her ass off or sing really melodically and well.
And she can really, she can pierce through. She can be threatening in a way that I haven't heard a lot of female vocalists be. Karen Crisis, I never really got scared of her. I was just sort of like,
she's
just a girl screaming. But Julie Christmas is like uncomfortable, in a way. So
yeah, she could punch you out.
But so we're gonna go into this, and then your number 1 is coming up right after Made Out of Babies.
What's it gonna be, guys?
Who knows? And my number 1 will follow. So enjoy Invisible Ink.
a messenger, like crow on a tombstone. Hidden under its wings, the darkness nowhere to hide. Bearer of ugly truth, on a grave of the morning, the blurry glass, the black crow. Here comes a messenger, found bringer of dark days. Here comes a messenger, black crow on a tombstone.
You just heard Made Out of Babies, Invisible Ink, which opened things up, and then Mark's album of the year. Why don't you tell us a little bit about
I'm gonna get a lot of email
The Age of Nero.
for being a poser or whatever. I guess nobody seems to like Satyricon anymore. It's not hip to like them. They're too boring.
We love Satyricon here at the
That's
Requiem
all
Metal
I ever
Podcast.
hear is they've been boring for years. But
I think this is an incredible record, more so than Now Diabolical
and
was.
just like what was the other one we just listened to that was actually like Torch, how it's only like 29 minutes. This is an 8-song record, a little bit longer, 45 minutes or so, but they just cut all the fat out of it, and they did the same thing with all the songwriting. It almost goes back to what Volcano is doing, a little bit more, not as stripped down as Now Diabolical.
Well, Now Diabolical had more of like some kind of like a rock and roll beat to it going underneath. Whereas like Volcano was like a lot more raised. It was kind of still had that catchiness, but like the razor sharp part that you kind of expect out of Satyricon.
I think they've got more of a like the black metal's back a little bit more, especially when I heard. I think the song I listened to the most this year is the My Skin Is Cold off the EP, especially. It's a little bit shorter version on the EP, and it's.
I'm a big Sign of the Trident fan. I mean, I like this whole record. I
like Sign of the Trident as well, but if I played that, everybody's gonna be like, oh, it's so repetitive. And
sure,
Black Crown of Tombstone's like it's just a great single.
Yeah,
and there's those, and I actually I was thinking of that song before I saw they put a video out and another single for it as well. But it's
so we're not posers here. What you're saying?
No, I'm sure I'll just get some flack over that.
That's
but
right.
I stick with what I know, and I branch out. But I'm always excited for a Satyricon record to come out.
Satyricon's like they're like
the Queens of the Stone Age of black metal. Is kind of how I
mean, I put Satyricon in the same like category as like Enslaved. Like I'm gonna like whatever they put out.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And like Immortal would be the same way. I'm just gonna kind of dig what they're gonna do. Whereas like other bands, I'm sort of leery. Like another new Mayhem. Another this or that. Like I'm just not. But out of that old guard, they still put out great records, I think, and they kind of keep growing and advancing.
And they've got this weird, almost like rock star status to themselves, which I think makes it very entertaining to see Satyr, like getting done up by a stylist and then going, and singing black metal is kind of hilarious. But then you see how harsh and extreme the music is. It's kind of goofy. But.
And I think another thing that really made this record come together is the fact that Snorri from Thorns helped kind of co-write a lot of this record, which really added that extra layer of depth that you hear in like the Thorn stuff.
And the Thorn stuff, you go back and I've listened to a lot of it recently again. It's incredibly simplistic, but wow, it totally like sets a mood in a second.
That's still a record that probably should be in the Hall of Fame someday.
Even though it's like their only proper record, really.
But
and also I want to mention Frost drumming.
Oh yeah,
not overly flashy, but just the stuff he's doing, it's so tight, it's so on all the time, and
when he needs to be fast. There's nobody
can blast like Frost can. So,
but Age of Nero, I was telling Mark that the only thing that bothered me about that is when
he got his history wrong.
Some interviews with Satyr where he said he wanted to write about the Age of Nero because it was like the downfall of the Roman Empire and all that stuff, and that was maybe where Rome sort of lost its morality, if Rome ever had morality, which they didn't.
Well, they're just like crazy, super anti-Christian.
Well,
stuff,
Nero was the guy burning the Christians and making little torches with
crucifying them upside down,
yeah, and burning them to like glow to his yard and stuff. And he burnt down Rome and all that stuff.
How black metal is that?
But anyways, Satyr, get your history right. Rome still had another 400 years for it to fell completely apart.
It's official collapse.
Exactly. So, and now we come to the final song of the night. And this is my album of the year. Again, it's interchangeable, but I think this is the one that I feel as an album. I mean, this really should be listened to as a whole piece of music.
I think it's the most innovative metal record that came out this year.
Yeah.
I can easily. I mean, Satyricon, it's kind of your standard, just refined, but this is actually something different that's coming out, and from America, which is.
You don't see that very often.
Well, if you do, it's always the more hardcore based, post rock type.
Converge or
something
like
on
that,
Hide Your Head. This is like straight up, black metal meets whatever. I mean, it's like
Pink Floyd.
It's like what, it's like what black metal could go on to now. But
I mean, I could hear Enslaved maybe go in this direction in some ways too. I mean, this is almost where I think Enslaved wants to go, and I think Knockmistium sort of jumped. Almost hurdled them in a way and did something almost beyond creative from what Enslaved was doing. But name of the record's Assassins, Black Meddle, Meddle, Part 1. And they're definitely obsessed with Pink Floyd on this. The opening track, One of These Nights, One of These Days from Pink Floyd. And Blake Judd, the guitarist and vocalist and the main songwriter, has really talked a lot about this record and how Pink Floyd was always in the back of his head. But
it's not one of those things where you hear it and it's like, oh, that's, like you hear an Anathema record and like, oh, they really like Pink Floyd. This is more like an approach to songwriting.
It's sort of like blended in with this sort of chaotic, beautiful, cringeworthy black metal at times. The vocals are so the high gain. I mean, it sounds like Burzum that's more listenable or something,
Yeah.
It's a really neat record. And the song we're going to hear, Assassins, the title track, it's... I don't know. It got some unsettling parts. About the 320 mark, these Sanford Parker, the synthesizer keyboardist playing the Moog, just really adds these like weird, bizarre layers that are sort of just floating throughout.
There's thunder in the background and like wind and
it's
but if it's done not as cheesy as
not at all. And it's in a way unsettling. Which there's very few black metal records that have come out in the last few years that like I hear and I'm like, oh, that's scary. It's mostly like a joke now. Like there's no threatening aspect.
You see these guys and they look like a bunch of
like
thugs
street
hanging out in
thugs,
the bar.
exactly, Chicago thugs. So this is the Chicago scene is a really interesting scene, and we heard Lair of the Minotaur a couple shows back, and there's some different things happening here. But in particular, I think the hero of this record is Tony Loreno on drums, who of Nile fame mostly. He does a lot of really cool, interesting,
very
things.
Unconventional stuff. Like even like some of the blasts he's doing, they're like almost that suffocation, just balls out, super hard blast. But then playing like that total like pop,
just really catchy beats and stuff. I mean, you really should get the whole record. This track gives it a little insight into what the record feels like, but it should
be listened to as a whole.
As a whole, and on headphones. I mean, it's really one of those cosmic records in a way. But Century Media really nailed a coup with this. I think this is a big band for Century Media that they can grow with, because Century Media hasn't had much quality stuff the last couple of years, really. So
no, they've just been picking up everybody's scraps for a while.
Exactly. So, anyways, we hope you agreed or maybe disagreed or whatever and enjoyed our top 14.
Or maybe see a little insight into where we're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. So if you disagree with us or you have some comments that you'd like to send to us, send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com or drop us a iTunes comment if you want.
Yeah, or give us a link on your blog or anything would be fantastic.
That'd be great. So welcome to 2009. It should be a good year for metal. Slayer. And some
we already know
one. Napalm Death is going to be on there
the next year.
So for Requiem Metal Podcast, I'm Jason.
And Mark.
Enjoy Knockmistium Assassins.